Hello everyone, I'm Cristiano Galvão from the Excel Turbo talking behind the scenes. I'm the organizer of the Excel Weekend and a speaker too. And now on this session, I bring the Excel MVP Nabil Mourad from Canada. You may find the short bio of all the speakers you can find in the LinkedIn posts and Facebook. Enjoy this speak.
Although Dan Bricklin and Bob Frankston created the first spreadsheet in the late 70s, they did not create the pivot tables. The basic concept that led to today's pivot tables was envisioned by the American engineer Pete Salas in 1986 and was introduced into Microsoft Excel in 1993. Since then, it became very popular among Excel users and often listed as a desirable skill in job description. I am Nabil Mourad. If you have been using Excel for a long time and you know pivot tables inside out, then this tutorial is for you. I will shed the light on 10 powerful tips and tricks that are little known and take your skills to the next level. So let's dive in. I have my data in 3 lists. The first list is a transactional list that shows a date, a product, units, and code. The second list shows the province and the region, and the code column matches the code column in the previous list, while the third list shows the retail price and the category for each one of the products. The product column matches the product column in the first list. I would like to analyze my data and see the revenue for each category. And I can do that in one of 2 ways. The classic way is to add 4 helper columns to the first list, in which I extract the province from the second list, the retail price and the category from the third one, and calculate the revenue. The second method is to convert the 3 lists into tables and send them to Power Pivot, the data model. And I'm going to show you the 2 techniques and compare between them. So I start with the classic technique. I'm going to add 4 helper columns to the first list. Now I want to start creating my calculation. I'll be using a VLOOKUP function to extract the province from the second list and 2 VLOOKUP functions to extract the retail and category from the third list, and accordingly I'll be calculating the revenue. I created my first calculation in column E. I created a VLOOKUP function that looks at the code and then extract the corresponding province from the second list. And then I created another VLOOKUP function that looks at the product name and extracts the corresponding retail price from the third list. And I created a similar VLOOKUP function that looks at the product name and extracts the category from the third list. And finally, I multiplied the unit price by the retail price to calculate the revenue. In this list, I have almost 70,000 different records, and look how long copying this calculation will take. Not only it will take a long time, but it will change the file size dramatically from less than 3 megabytes to be over 7 megabytes. So the file size increases considerably, which doesn't happen when I put the data into the data model. I'm going to select the 4 cells and then I double click on the lower right corner. Look how much time it's taking to copy, a very long time. And by copying the 4 functions, I would have created over 270,000 different functions in this worksheet. I'm going to use this list for creating 1 pivot table, but let's send the 3 tables into the data model. Let's go to the data model worksheet and send the 3 tables to the data model in Power Pivot. I select a cell in the first table, go to the Power Pivot tab and click on Add to Data Model. I'll be repeating for the second and the third table. I already added the first 2. Let's add the last one. I click on Add to Data Model, and here are the 3 tables in the Power Pivot window. To the right side of the Home tab, I click on Diagram View, and I would like to create relationships which will be the equivalent of the 270,000 VLOOKUP functions that we created using the classic technique. To create the relationship, I drag the code from the province table, I drop it over the matching field in the products table, and then I drag the product from the category and drop it over the product in the products table. I also want to calculate the revenue. Then I'm going to switch back to data view, and in the products table, I'll be creating my measure. This measure will multiply the units from the products table by the retail price in the category table. It will do that row by row, and then it will be adding up the result of the multiplication. I calculated my revenue measure using the SUMX function. I multiplied the units by the related retail price from the category table, and I formatted the measure. I'm going to start creating my pivot table. Then I go back to Excel by clicking on the Excel icon. I start creating my pivot table out of the list in which I calculated the 270,000 VLOOKUP functions. I go to the Insert tab of the ribbon. I click on Pivot Table. I want to create my pivot table in a new worksheet. Here is my pivot table field list. I drag the category to the rows drop area. I drag the revenue to the values, and I created my pivot table. I will have to go and format the numbers. What if I want to create the second pivot table out of the data model? Then I'm going to select any cell in the worksheet. I go to the Insert tab of the ribbon, click on the down arrow for pivot table, select from data model, and I want to create my pivot table in the existing worksheet. I drag the category to the rows, and I drag the revenue measure to the values, and I created my pivot table, and the numbers are formatted because the formatting is inherited from the measure. Creating a pivot table out of the data model reduces the size of your workbook, and it increases the efficiency and the speed of calculation in your workbook. There is an option called Quick Explore that exists when we create a pivot table out of the data model, but it doesn't exist when we create a pivot table out of a list or a table from the worksheet. So if I select a category, and this is the pivot table created from the worksheet list, and right-click, then I don't see this option, Quick Explore. However, if I select a category from the pivot table created from the data model, and then I right-click, here is the Quick Explore functionality. What does Quick Explore mean? It enables me to drill down multiple levels as needed. So when I select Quick Explore, it will show me the different options available for drilling down into details. Right now I have the category. I'm selecting the canned category, and I want to see it for each region. Then I expand the province, and when I select region, the category will move as a filter, and it will be filtered down to canned. Let's select the region and then drill down. Then the category moves as a filter. It's filtered to the canned category, and now I see the revenue for the different regions. I want to drill down even more for each province in the central region. Then I right-click, select Quick Explore. Now the region will be added to the filter, and I will be drilling down into provinces in the central region. Let's select province and then drill down, and I'm looking at the different provinces in the central region. Should you wish to return to what we had before, then we need to drag the province out, and we need to move the category down, and then we remove the filter, and we are back to where we started. The Quick Explore functionality is only available when you create pivot tables from the data model. I want to create a pivot table that shows the sum of revenue for each category in each province. And I'm going to do that twice. The first time I'll be using the worksheet list with thousands of VLOOKUP functions, and the second time I'll be using the same data after converting it into 3 tables and sending it to the data model and creating relationships. Creating the same exact pivot table by using the data model will save me 8 steps. Let's see how we do that. I go to the classic worksheet, and here is my source list, and I want to create a pivot table in a new worksheet. I click on Pivot Table, I accept the default into a new worksheet, and I'm going to start by dragging the province into the rows area. Then I'll be dragging the category under the province in the rows area, and finally I'll be dragging the revenue. Now I would like to improve the appearance of my pivot table, and I'll be doing so many steps. I want to get rid of the collapse and expand button, then I click on field buttons to turn it off. I want to format the revenue. I select a single value. I right click, select number format, and then I'll be applying, let's say, a currency format. I want to change the layout and split the province and the category into two columns. I do that on the Design tab by changing the report layout into tabular form. I also want to repeat the province. Then I click on Report Layout and select Repeat All Item Labels. I then want to remove the grand total and the subtotal, so I click under Subtotal, select Do Not Show Subtotal, click under Grand Total, Off for rows and columns. I want to apply a style. Let's select this style, and I would have created the pivot table the way I want. Now let's create the same exact pivot table out of the data model, and look how many steps we'll be saving. I switch to Power Pivot, click on Manage to go to the data model. I click on the down arrow for pivot table, and look at this beautiful option, Flatten Pivot Table. I give it a click, and I want to create my pivot table in the existing worksheet next to the previous pivot table. I hit OK. I expand the fields. I drag the province to the rows, and then I drag the categories below the province, and I drag the revenue to the values area, and I would have created the same pivot table without the need of doing 8 extra steps like when using the worksheet list. I created two similar pivot tables. The left one is created by using the worksheet list in the classic worksheet. I drag the date to the rows area, and I split it, keeping only the year and the quarter. And the second pivot table was created from the data model, where I did the same exact thing. I have the year and the quarter and the sum of revenue for each quarter in each year. Now I would like to group my data in a different way, and I'll be doing that on either side. I start by copying the first pivot table created from the worksheet list, and here I would like to change the grouping option, so I select any cell in the date column, and I right-click and select Group. Instead of having year and quarter, I want to have year and month. Then I'm going to select month, deselect quarter from the grouping dialog box. When I hit OK, I get what I want, but I messed up the previous pivot table. If I want to change back the first pivot table to year and quarter, I right-click and select Group. Then this time I'll be selecting quarter and deselect months. When I hit OK, both pivot tables change as if they are identical twins. This problem doesn't exist when I create my pivot table out of a data model. I'm going to do the same exact thing, select my pivot table, press Ctrl and drag to create a second version of the pivot table. And this time when I right-click and select Group, I want to change the grouping options. Instead of year and quarter, I want to select year and month. And when I hit OK, the first pivot table is not affected. Grouping dates works much better when you use the data from the data model. A dashboard is a graphic summary that answers questions about our data, consolidated and arranged on one single screen so that information can be monitored at a glance. To create a dashboard, I have my source data, and then I need to create a preparation sheet. This is where I create all the pivot tables and the pivot charts. Then I copy the pivot charts into the dashboard worksheet, and I already created 4 pivot tables out of this classic worksheet list. So if I click on the preparation worksheet, these are my pivot tables. And then for each one of the pivot tables, I'll be creating a pivot chart. I'll be formatting the different pivot charts and then copy them to the dashboard worksheet. I created 4 pivot charts corresponding to 4 pivot tables answering questions about my data. Now I need to copy the pivot charts into another worksheet, rearrange them and resize them in preparation for creating my final dashboard. But instead of doing all that, I'm going to replace all these steps by a beautiful functionality available in the data model. So let's have a look. I switch to the data model by clicking on Power Pivot, and then I click on Manage. This is the Power Pivot data model. I click on the down arrow for Pivot Table, and look at this beautiful functionality. Without the need of creating a preparation worksheet, without the need of creating any pivot tables, I'll start right away creating and formatting my pivot charts by selecting this option for charts. When I click on this option, I want to dump it in a new worksheet. I hit OK, and in the new worksheet, I have the placeholder for 4 pivot charts that are equally resized and arranged on the new worksheet. All what I need to do is to start dragging the fields for each one of the pivot charts. To do that, I click on Pivot Table Analyze tab and click on the field list, and I'm going to start dragging the fields for each one of the 4 pivot charts. For the first pivot chart, I want to see the revenue per category. Then I drag the category to the axis drop area, and I drag the revenue to the values area, and I would have created my first pivot chart. I will do the same for the other 3 pivot charts. Just drag and drop the fields. I can change the pivot table chart type. Now I would like to start formatting the different elements of each one of the pivot charts. I formatted the different elements in each one of the pivot charts. The bars, the columns, the data labels, the vertical axis, the horizontal axis, the legend, if any. And now my dashboard that was created with a single click looks much better. I want to add some interactivity by creating a matching slicer for the products and a timeline. I created my slicer and timeline. I can test the interactivity in any way I want. I can release my slicer by clicking on the funnel icon. My final step is to add a company logo and add a title, so let's do that. I added a company logo, the Office Instructor, and a website, OfficeInstructor.com, and I was able to create a very simple dashboard, and I saved lots of steps by using the functionality from the data model for charts. We frequently want to analyze data by fiscal year, and we do that by creating a pivot table. We drag the date field to the rows area, and automatically Excel splits the date into year, quarter, and month. I drag the year to the column area, and I cap the quarter and month, and I do have the revenue for each month, in each quarter, in each year, and that's wonderful. This works fine when the fiscal year matches the calendar year. Then quarter 1 is January, February, March, quarter 2 is April, May, June, and so on. But what if the fiscal year does not match the calendar year? What if my fiscal year starts on the 1st of October? Then quarter 1 in this case will be October, November, and December. Quarter 2 will be January, February, and March. Let's see how we do that. In the next worksheet, October, I created the same exact pivot table, and because the fiscal year starts in October, but we have the same exact month for one quarter. So October, November, December, instead of being quarter 4, they are still together as a quarter, but they become quarter 1. And January, February, March, instead of being quarter 1, they become 2. April, May, June will become quarter 3. July, August, and September will become quarter 4. And to do that, I'm going to start editing the quarter name. So I start typing quarter 1. Then I type quarter 2 for January, February, March, quarter 3 for April, May, June, and quarter 4 for July, August, September. All what I need to do next is to right-click on quarter 1, hover over Move, and select Move quarter 1 to beginning, and I would have solved the issue. I have quarter 1, October, November, December, and my pivot table updates on the fly. The real problem is, if the months in a fiscal quarter do not match the months in a calendar quarter. So if the fiscal year starts on November, then in this case, quarter number 1 will be November, December, and January. Quarter number 2 will be February, March, and April. In this case, creating the pivot table requires preparation by creating some helper columns. I created a helper column, I named it Fiscal Quarter, and this helper column is using the choose function to extract the corresponding fiscal quarter. I also created a helper column using an if function to extract the fiscal year, and now I can start creating my pivot table. I drag the fiscal quarter to the row. I drag the fiscal year to the column, and then I'll be dragging the date to the rows below the fiscal quarter, and Excel will be splitting the date into its components. I just want to keep the date. I'm going to drag the revenue and drop it into the values area. Let's format the pivot table, change the layout to a tabular layout, and I created my pivot table based upon the fiscal year starting in November in order to sort the months in a logical order. So I would like to start November, December, and January. Then I created a custom list starting in November to use it for sorting this column. I'm going to sort the date column by clicking on the down arrow for the label. I select more sort options, and here I want to select ascending. I want to go to more options in the lower left corner, take the check away from sort automatically, and then from the drop list I'll be selecting the custom list that I created November, December, January, and February. When I hit OK, I get the proper order for the month and the proper order for the quarters, and I was able to calculate the sum of revenue for each month in each quarter in each year based on a fiscal year that starts in November. In this example, I created a pivot table in which I see the sum of revenue for each region in each category, and I created a subtotal as well. If I change the summary function from a sum function to an average function, well, all the calculations change and the subtotal changes as well. What I would like to do is to create multiple subtotals, not only one single subtotal. So I'm going to switch back to the sum, Control Z to undo. And to do that, I go to the pivot table field list. I click on the down arrow for category in the rows drop area. And from here, I'll be selecting field settings. In the field settings dialog box, on the subtotals and filters, I want to create multiple subtotals. So I click on custom. And now I'll be able to select all the subtotals I want. I click on sum, I click on average, I click on max, I click on min, and the moment I hit OK, I would have created multiple subtotals simultaneously. This is a very nice feature that gives me more insights about my data. We know that we can create a pivot table by going to the Insert tab of the ribbon and click on Pivot Table, but you can also create a pivot table without even going to the Insert tab of the ribbon. With one single cell selected in the source list, if I select the entire list by hitting Ctrl A, to the lower right corner of my list, a little options tag pops up. This is the Quick Analysis tool. It was introduced into Excel in Office 2013. If I give it a click and then click on Tables, here I see different thumbnails for different pivot tables. Just by giving a click to any one of them, a new pivot table will be created without the need of going through the regular steps of selecting a new worksheet and dragging and dropping the fields. Many pivot table users are familiar with the beautiful functionality called Show Details, or the drill down feature of a pivot table. So I have the sum of revenue for the central region. If I want to create a report showing all the transactions where the region is the central region, then I can simply double-click on this number or right-click and select Show Details. But before I do, I want to show you what happens if I insert a new worksheet, a regular worksheet, either by clicking on the new worksheet icon or by using the shortcut Shift F11. When I insert a new worksheet, I cannot undo this action. By going to the undo command, it's even grayed out. I cannot use the Ctrl Z to remove it. However, if I go to my pivot table and then I use the drill down feature of a pivot table to generate that report, the report will be created in a new worksheet. So if I double click to create this beautiful report where the region is the central region, If I want to go back, this is the only worksheet created that can be undone. So if I hit Ctrl Z, I would have deleted the worksheet. In this example, I created a pivot table, a pivot chart, and a slicer. The slicer controls the pivot table and the pivot chart. But because we have so many other options, I wish to create a drop list like the filter drop list for the slicer to combine the functionality of a slicer and the drop list. I'm going to copy my pivot table, Ctrl C to copy, and I'm going to paste it somewhere in the worksheet, Ctrl V to paste it. I'll bring the pivot table field list to remove the different fields, the province and revenue, and I'll be bringing only one single field. I'll be dragging the product to the filter. I can close the pivot table field list. I can select this second version of the pivot table. I can drag it and copy it and paste it wherever I want. I change the color of the font in these two cells. I change the font color to white. And then I move my pivot table on top of this new filter that I just created. Now I have the functionality of the slicer and filter combined together. My slicer is positioned on top of the filter coming from the second pivot table in a way that the filter appears as part of the slicer. I can release my filter by clicking on the down arrow for the second pivot table filter. I take the check away from all and then I hit OK. My filter governs the pivot table and the pivot chart. It's also reflected on my slicer, and I can still make my selection from the slicer by selecting any option I want. I can release my slicer by clicking on the funnel icon, and now I combine the functionality of the slicer with the functionality of the filter. I hope you found value in this presentation. If you want to learn hundreds of tips about pivot tables, you can read my book, Pivot Tables from Data to Dashboard. I also invite you to keep learning Excel from me by subscribing to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/OfficeInstructor, and reading my blogs, OfficeInstructor.com. Thanks for watching and see you next time.